Hi, Alan Tome from SprinterEngineering here. Today we're going to install a diesel heater, an S2D2, on this brand new 2019 Mercedes Sprinter van. Some of the things you're going to need, obviously you're going to need the heater kit that you'll get from us. Some nut drivers are a good idea, drill bits, metric set of socket wrenches, some drill, a socket wrench, a T20 and a T25 driver bit, an 1 1/8" hole saw, a 2 3/4 inch hole saw. You'll need a fuel tap. A couple of stainless steel self-tappers is a good idea. And then a step bit is also a good idea. Sorry about the noise in the background. Someone's cutting a window in a van. The time is 2:30. All right, so let's see how long this takes. First thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the front passenger and driver's seat. Once you get the seat off, it's easiest just to lay it back. You can also unplug these wires and move it to the back of the van if you want, but this gives us plenty of room to work. All right, so now both seats are off. Where you're going to tap into for the heater is going to be right here. This is the auxiliary tap port. The middle post is always on, and always on is what you want your heater to be on. So we're going to tap into this middle post for the heater. So here's what you get from us. And then you're going to want to cut this corner off about 2.5 inches on either side, because we're not going to use this, but we don't want it to go in straight. We need to go at it at an angle, and this corner over here is going to hit on the seat. So let me show you how that works. So here's the seat box, right? And the front of fan goes that way. And basically we want, if you think about this, here's a plug that goes through the floor. It's directly in the middle of two support beams, or two frame members. So you want these holes all to be generally lined up center line with that. So about like that. All right, so the way to keep in mind how the air flows, it goes in here and then it goes over these heating vents and out into the van. So it's going to sit in here like this. I'm going to set it down on the floor. So we want it to sit in there, yeah, about like that. So it's a nice easy transition between here and out. But we want to make sure we don't, push it so that it rubs against this wall or interferes with this opening in the seat base. All right, so that's about where we want it. And I've got it sitting on the plate. So now when I lift this off straight up, now I know exactly where my holes need to be. And see, the reason we cut this corner off is because it would have hit the side of the seat box. And you can also see that the plug, the knockout plug, is pretty much in the middle of those, equal amount on either side. So I'm going to mark those now, and then we'll drill them. All right, so now I've marked the holes, and you'll notice I've got one of these X through it. So only one of these holes you need for your fuel line, depending on which direction your heater's blowing. And our heater's blowing that way. So if you look at the heater, right, there's the output, there's the input. So it's going to sit in there this way. Where's the fuel line? It's right there. So that corresponds to that hole, not that one. So that one's X'd out so we don't accidentally drill it. All right, so now all the holes are drilled, but I'm going to make these holes a little bit bigger with this step bit. All right, once the holes are drilled, let's test fit it. Yep, fits in there perfectly. So let's clean up the edges, and then we'll spray the raw edges of the paint with some primer so they don't rust. All right, and since this is under the seat, it doesn't need to be pretty. Just make sure you get a good coat on it, because this is a pretty rust-prone spot. So while that's drying, we're going to go ahead and drill the hole in here for the heater vent. All right, so now the hole is drilled. We'll just clean up this edge with a file, put a little bit of paint on it again, and then while it's drying, we'll get back to this hole. All right, so next we're going to mount the heater to the floor of the van. So we need to look through our goodie bag for something that looks like nuts and bolts. Like that. That looks like the one we're looking for. So we're going to take out of here 4 of these small bolts and 4 washers. And I don't know if it's necessary, but I like putting a little thread lock on these bolts. Then after you get your Loctite on there, the easiest way to tighten these things up and get them on there is with a 10mm nut driver. Before you put your heater on, you'll want to put the intake grate and the output flange on the heater itself before you actually put it in the hole. All right, so now she's in there. Now let's go underneath and put these bolts on it. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the heater vent in, and it's going to go right in that hole. Now, unfortunately, the kit doesn't really come with any good screws for this, so we usually use these little black screws you can get from an automotive store. They look a little better than the chrome ones that they send with it. And for this, I usually pre-drill this top hole and then put a screw in it. That way the other two don't move around when I'm pre-drilling them. All right, so after cutting it and test fitting it, should look about like that. Now we'll take the hose clamps and put on both ends, and we'll be done with this step. All right, everything is done inside here except for hooking up the wiring harness. Take this and snap it on. All right, for the wiring harness, we're going to take the 12-volt lines and run them underneath there to go over to the driver's seat. The fuel wires we're going to run down through this plug in the floor. So we'll pop that plug out, cut a slit in it, run the wire through there. And then the thermostat wire is going to follow this wire out, and it's going to come out right over here. And then we'll either go up this column or down there, because where we need to get with the thermostat is up in that corner. All right, so if you're wondering which wire is which, the really long cable with just 2 strands in it and 2 plugs on the end of it, that's for the fuel. This one with the big red wires and the bypass plug, that's the positive and ground. Positive are these 2 red wires, and the ground is the brown wire. And then the last one is this one with all these wires in it, but for our application, all we're going to use really are these ones that are already attached to this plug. And this plug will plug directly into the controller. Oops, dropped it. So for the fuel line, you'll want to be really careful of these 2 clips on the end. They're kind of hard to replace, so we don't want to cut them off and use something else, because these go into a special plug that plugs directly into the pump. So we'll want to feed those through the plug that I popped out. That's the plug from right there. And cut a little slit in it, and if you squeeze it, you can get a little opening, and we're going to feed the wire for the fuel pump through there and then over to where the fuel pump's going to sit. I've fed almost all the fuel line electrical through there. We're going to pull a bunch of it back up, but for the time being, just get it out of the way. We're going to run it all through the floor. Next thing we're going to want to do is run the 12-volt through this opening here, over and into that box. On the 2019s, they've got this big contraption here. It holds a bunch of stuff. This one doesn't have much on it, but the easiest way to fish the wire from over there to over here is to take this big plastic piece. It's got 2 bolts that hold to it. It's 10mm. Just unbolt it, slide it out of the way a little bit, and then you can run a fish tape under and then pull the wire back over through. So we'll do that next. So this is where having an electric socket wrench really comes in handy. There's where we need to get to. So the easiest way to fish the wire between the seats is to pull up the floor mat, and then we're going to pull up this plate, and then it'll give us easy access right over through. All right, so fishing that wire through here can be one of the most daunting parts. So if you can pry this up, get these little clips off of those little plastic clips with a screwdriver, then you can fish it all the way down here to the end of the hand, and then you kind of have to feel for it to get it to come through and pull it through on the side. So when you get it, just pull enough that you can get around to right here, because this is what we're going to attach to. And then we're going to attach to the ground that's down here underneath. All right, so once you've got it fished through, come on, rummage through your goodie bag again. We want to find this bag with the fuse holder. And then we also want to find these two wires, a thin red one and a 12 gauge red one. It's probably 14 and 12. And they both have little ends on them. And the brown one is negative. We're going to put a end on that, and we're going to attach it to that ground bolt right there, which is a factory ground. Then we're going to take these other two and we're going to run them into that fuse box. So we need to put an end on each one of these so it'll fit in the fuse block. And then we're going to attach both of those positive feeds for that fuse block over here to this, which is our builder's tap. We're going to attach it to the middle post, which is 12 volt always on, after we put this plastic piece back in place. But first thing we're going to do is put the ends on, attach it to the fuse block, put the brown wire down onto that ground. Then we'll put everything back in. Then we'll take these two wires through the fuse block and into that builder's tap. The wires go in this side, and the fuse goes over here and connects the two. So this one feeds, that one, this one's the line coming in, this one's the line going out, in, out, in, out. You're only going to use 4 of them. But these two pre-made wires, we'll just pick a side. Doesn't matter if it's this side or this side, but they both need to be on the same side. And we'll insert those now, and then we'll put these ends on the wires that are in under the seat box, and then they'll insert opposite the wires that we install. Okay, so I've inserted the two wires on one side of the fuse block, and you know when they're in because you'll hear them click. So don't force them. If they don't click, then turn around the other way. And then on the other end, I join the wires together and put a connector on it. So this connector will fit over that terminal underneath the driver's seat. Anyway, so having that little tool, that crimper tool, allows you to crimp these things up pretty nicely. I mean, you can do it by hand. It's just a little bit more difficult. All right, so now I've got the two wires that are coming from the heater over here on this side, coming in, and then matched up, coming out on this side to a single connector, which will connect to the positive always on 12 volt. And when we get ready, we'll put the fuse in there. And then the only thing we need to do now is just attach this ground wire to this ground bolt down here on the bottom. Okay, so now we're all done under the driver's seat. We've got the hot going to the heater here, to the middle tap, which is always on. The fuse is over here. We haven't put the fuse in it yet, but it'll sit right up here. And then everything else is back in place. So we can put the fuse in, put the cover on it, put the seat back on. Okay, so I've coiled up the extra 12 volt wire that's going underneath to the other side. And then I pulled the wire harness over so I got as much of the thermostat wire as I can before it exits the, there's a splice right here so it can't go any farther. Anyway, I pulled that out of there, ran it out the bottom, up here, and you can see it right there a little bit, and then it's going above the ceiling support braces down, and it's hanging right there, which is about where he wants his thermostat. So I'm just going to plug it in and leave it hanging there because obviously he's got a lot of finish out still to do on this van. Right, so here's the Easy Start Pro thermostat. And then we're going to plug it into that cable right there. The Easy Start has got 2 connectors on the end of them. This one I think is for an external thermostat. We're not going to use that one. So the one that fits is the one you use. So plug that in. And now as soon as we fire it up, this will be ready to go. So for that time being, I'm just going to set that right there. Well, actually, no. So for the time being, I'm just going to leave it hanging right there. All right, so the fuel pumps we get from the UK are a little bit different than the United States ones in the fact that they flow a different way. So see the fuel, and it's got the arrow going that direction. So I typically write on here an arrow going that way so that when I'm under the van, I don't forget, because we've installed these backwards plenty of times. So fuel, right to left. There, now I won't forget when I'm under the van. Let's look in our goodie box again and find the fuel mounting. So, not that one. Here we go. That's the fuel pump mount. So we'll take that and the fuel pump and go underneath. Okay, like I said before, here's the fuel tap we're going to use. Here's a nice, clean, flat area we can mount the fuel pump to. We'll put it like that. So you don't ever want to mount the fuel pumps level. You always want to mount them at an angle, so if any air gets in there, the fuel pump doesn't get locked up. And this is also where some good stainless steel self-tapping screws come in really handy. The kit doesn't come with them, but you can get these at an auto parts store. Just make sure everything you use is stainless steel. Okay, so now the fuel pump is mounted. So now we're gonna go make our fuel line that goes from here around to there. And then we'll grab the fuel line from over here and the electricity and run it up over the heat shroud, zip tie it up here so it doesn't interfere with the drive shaft, and get it all over here. So now let's look in the goodie bag again and let's find the one with the fuel line. So that's this one, so open that. Okay, so one of the issues you're gonna have is that the fuel tap has this kind of big diameter tubing, and the fuel line over to the heater is teeny tiny. So somehow you got to get from that to that. And so we struggled with this a couple times, but then we figured out a really cool trick. What we're going to do is we're going to cut a length of this big enough to fit over the end of that, plus another inch. So we'll probably cut this in half. And then we're going to take some of this fuel line, cut it in half, and jam it in the end of there. And then we're going to put clamps over each end so that the small diameter will hold that and the big diameter will fit over that. All right, so now I cut those two long lengths of tubing in half. So this is the fat piece, and then you can see that I've inserted a smaller piece inside the fat tubing, and then the fuel line will go in there, and then this end will go on the fuel tap. Inside the installation box is a bag with this marking on it, but basically it's got all these hose clamps. And keep in mind there's a couple sizes of hose clamps. There's actually three sizes. There's a small one, a medium one, and this large one. So you want to make sure you use them correctly. You don't want to put the big hose on a little piece because it won't clamp down tight enough. All right, so this is the end product. So we've got the fuel tap going into our contraption of hoses and out in the blue fuel line. And I just cut this one a couple feet long because this is going to go from the fuel tap to the fuel pump, which is only about 6 inches away. And when you're inserting this blue fuel line, you might put like a little tick mark, like I took a black permanent marker and put it on there so that you know how much you're inserting into there, because you don't want to think you put a whole lot and wind up only putting this much and it falls out. So you want to put a good 3/4 or an inch in there so that it goes well past where the hose clamp is. All right, so now let's go down and put this on. I'm going to take another piece of this because this is going to go on the, actually let's take the longer one. Take this is going to go on one end of the fuel pump and the other end on this after we cut it to length. And then for this, we're going to need the small hose clamps. So this is the part where people get fuel spilled on them. So we're going to go kind of fast. So we've got our piece of hose for here, so let's go ahead and put that on. Okay. And again, our 7mm nut driver. Okay, now we're ready to go from there to there. So here's our tap. So on here, there's a little button right there. You just push that button in, and as soon as you do, pull it off. Don't lay underneath it in case some diesel fuel comes out. So take that, pull it off, slide that one on. Easy as that. So now I just need to get from there to there. So we'll take that and we'll cut this with a pair of wire cutters. We'll insert that in there. All right, so now we've tapped into the fuel line. It's coming around, it's going into our fuel pump. Now we just need to run the fuel line, the rest of the blue line from here over to the heater, and then the electric from the heater over here. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, I went ahead and ran the electrical line over from the heater. I ran it on top of the heat shroud for the exhaust and over the top of the drive shaft, and we'll zip tie it up in a minute. But basically, it's going to come around, kind of follow that same curve and plug right in here. And earlier I told you to be careful of these ends, and that's because they need to fit inside this special connector. It fits on this special German connector here. If you booger one of these up, you step on them, run over them, jack them up in some way, you're gonna have a hard time using this pump. It doesn't matter which side they go in, and what you want to make sure is when you stick them in, you kind of feel them click, and then you can see the metal of the contact there when you look in the end. All right, so let's try. And they're square, so if it doesn't go in one way, just kind of turn it 90 degrees and try again. Oh, I heard it click. Okay, they both clicked, and you can see, if you look right down on the end, you can see the metal of the connectors. So, and that just slides. Right over there. And then when we get ready to wrap it up, we'll zip tie this like that. Okay, so the next thing is the fuel line. So here's our fuel line. I went ahead and put one end on. Get another one of these small connectors, and it goes on this side. So we leave these caps on here so that we don't get any dirt off your fuel pump. And we're going to go right up there, put this on in a direction where it's easy for us to get to with our wrench. Slide that on. Doesn't need to go all the way as long as it goes past that nipple. Now we're going to feed this back the same way we brought the power line through. So we'll just follow that same trail. Okay, now we're back over to the side where the heater is. And you can always remember which one's exhaust and which one is intake by the front of the car. So the front of the car is intake, and the rear, you know, right, the exhaust goes out the rear. So this is the exhaust, this is the intake, and this little nipple here is the fuel line. So next thing we're going to put in is the muffler, which is in the installation box. And there'll be two pieces of hose for the muffler. So basically it'll go from the heater to the muffler, and then the muffler to this little exhaust pipe. And you can tell it's the end because it's got this little cap over it, so that'll come out of there. Now, installation box, you'll look for another goodie bag, and this one has the hose clamps for this. And you'll notice that there's two kinds. There's a kind of a heavy duty one and a more lightweight one. The lightweight one is for this intake, and the heavy duty one is for the hot exhaust pipes. Okay, so here we go. So we've got the heater over here, heavy duty clamp going into the long exhaust pipe, another clamp, exhaust, the muffler, another clamp, and then the short piece is going to exit the side of the van. And then this black hose is the intake, and it's got the more traditional kind of lightweight hose clamp because it's nice cool air. So let's go down and we'll attach these two, and then we'll kind of see where we're going to wind up coming out of the van. And this first one, on the new Mercedes 19s, there's a box. It's basically this box right here. And so it makes a great shelf underneath the heater for you to tuck this line. So it only needs to be about that long. So I'm going to cut that before you even get under the van. I know it only needs to be about a foot. Okay, so the first one we're going to put on is the easy one. It's going to be the intake. And so here's the intake. And I put the little cap on the end that's in the installation box. And I'm going to put the hose clamp on. I'm going to get it started so that It's a little bit easier once I get up there in that cavity to get it the rest of the way snug. Don't want it too tight because it'll keep it from sliding over, but okay. And again, you can always remember the one in the front is the intake and the one in the back is exhaust. So this one is going to just go, oops. Right on there like that. Actually, there we go. Sorry, you probably can't see this. Okay, so we've got it on here and it's just going up underneath this box. Now we're going to do the exhaust. We've got the heavier duty hose clamp and the hose. Slide that on there. And then this one actually takes looks like a Torx 25. So I need to go get one of those. All right, actually I was wrong. It's a T20, or it's a T30, Torx 30 is what you need. So Torx 30. Okay, it's on there good. All right, so now what we're going to do is we want to kind of route this down, clear of electric line, and kind of over back that direction so that we can put our muffler in. So I'm going to put a clamp right there to keep it nice and sturdy, and then we'll worry about this back part in a second. Okay, so in your muffler, you want to attach the mounting bracket on there, and there's a couple nuts and bolts in the nuts and bolts bag. Put some Loctite on that too, because you don't want that to vibrate loose. And then we're going to mount this way, and the reason for that is because it's easier to get to the mounting, to the screw hole, if you mount it that way. If you mount it this way, that screw hole to mount is way up there. It's kind of hard to get to. All right, so that's going to go on there. So probably we should mount that first. We'll make sure we're at the right distance. So I'll put that on. And with this screw, you want to make sure you come down here pretty low in this curve. If you come up here high, sometimes the screw will go into the footwell and you'll be able to see the end of the screw. So as long as you stay down here low, it won't project through the plastic footwell. Right there. On there. So then the next thing I got to do is just put the exhaust on, and we'll get a kind of pre-bend that. That's kind of what we want it to do. All right, we're ready to go. So I'm going to go put the fuses in, and then let's start it up. It usually takes a couple times to run it through in order for the gas to get through the fuel line, but we can be running it while I put the front seats back in. So let's take a look, see what it says. So language, English, we'll choose yes. We want 12-hour time. All right, it's 6:04 p.m. And it is Thursday. And we want this in Fahrenheit, not centigrade. And we just keep going through all the rest of these. There. Now we're all set up. It's off. So we'll click it again. Let's turn the temperature up. We'll run it for 30 minutes. All right. So now it's on. Get running, and I feel a little air coming out of there. So now I'm going to secure these wires in here, make it look a little nicer, and start putting the seats back in while we run the heater through a couple cycles so that it gets some fuel into the fuel line.